No one could understand how a tiny bobcat, its body broken and its back legs completely paralyzed, still dragged itself across the cold mountain road just to cling to the pant leg of a stranger. On that lonely stretch where everyone hurried past in fear, only one fading pair of eyes begged to be seen. No one stopped to help until one moment changed the little bobcat's entire life forever. Late one chilly afternoon near Flagstaff, the mountains were unusually quiet. The wind carried the scent of dry pine and cold soil, the kind of air that made older folks like Martha Ellison pull their coats a little tighter even inside the car. She had just finished picking up a small box of household supplies. Nothing important, just things she had delayed buying for weeks while sorting out her insurance papers and calling her mortgage company. At 62, she had begun to move slower, think slower, but her heart had never hardened with age. It remained the same warm, steady heart she'd always had. The road home curved along a narrow ridge. Martha drove carefully. She knew accidents happened quickly in these parts, especially with wildlife darting across without warning. But today, she noticed something different, something still. A small shape lay off to the right side of the pavement, half in the brush, half exposed to the fading light. At first, she thought it was a jacket someone had dropped, or maybe a bag left behind by hikers. But as she drew closer, a thin, jerky movement made her foot lift from the gas pedal. The shape wasn't still at all. It shifted, slowly, painfully, as if dragging itself forward. Martha stopped the car. She opened her door with caution, stepped out, and squinted toward the shape. Her eyesight wasn't perfect anymore, but the sun was low enough to cast a soft glow over the dirt. And that was when she finally understood what she was looking at. It wasn't a jacket, not a bag, not anything lifeless. It was a young bobcat, no bigger than a toddler, its body trembling as it attempted to pull itself along with just its front legs. The hind legs lay limp behind it, twisted in a way that made Martha's breath catch. Its coat, brown with darker stripes, was matted with dust and small patches of dried blood. Its ears twitched, but its movements were painfully slow, like every inch forward cost it more than it had to give. A wave of worry washed over her. She knew bobcats could be dangerous, especially when hurt, but something about this one didn't send fear into her. Instead, it stirred something older and deeper inside her, the same instinct that made her stop years ago when she once found a stray cat crying behind a dumpster. She was always the one who stopped. But this wasn't a house cat. This was a wild animal. Still, it was suffering. Martha stepped closer, keeping her hands low and her voice soft. "Easy now. Easy, sweetheart. I won't hurt you." The bobcat didn't snarl. It didn't even try to lift a paw in warning. It simply looked up at her with the kind of expression that didn't belong on the face of a wild predator, an expression of fear, exhaustion, and something much harder to bear. Hope. It made a sound, faint and rasping, a mix between a whine and a breathless plea. Martha felt her throat tighten. She took one step back, intending to return to her car for her phone to call wildlife rescue. But the moment she turned away, the tiny creature reacted with sudden panic. Its claws scraped desperately across the pavement as it dragged its broken body toward her, pulling itself inch by inch, leaving a thin, heartbreaking trail behind. It wasn't trying to attack her. It wasn't acting like a wild animal. It was acting like something that was terrified of being left alone to die. "Good Lord," Martha whispered, one hand pressing to her chest. "You thought I was leaving you." She knelt down slowly. The bobcat froze, panting hard, its small ribs expanding and collapsing in uneven rhythm. It blinked at her, and that look, tired, pleading, trusting without reason, brought back a memory she hadn't expected. 14 years earlier, her daughter Lily had found a stray kitten hiding beneath the porch steps, meowing for help. Lily had insisted they keep it, and Martha eventually agreed. That kitten had lived with them for years, through house repairs, job changes, even through the stressful months when Martha had to switch her retirement plan and deal with unexpected health care costs. Animals had been there for her in ways most people never saw. Maybe that was why this scene felt familiar, painfully familiar. "I'm not leaving," she promised. Just then, the sound of footsteps and crunching dirt approached. A couple of hikers, middle-aged, wearing bright jackets and holding trekking poles, slowed down when they noticed the animal. "Ma'am, step away," one of them warned. "Bobcats are dangerous. Ushers, especially when injured." But the bobcat didn't move toward them. It only watched Martha, eyes wide, as if she were the only thing keeping it tethered to life. "I can't leave it like this," she said quietly. The hikers exchanged uneasy looks. One of them lifted a phone, perhaps to record, perhaps to call someone, but neither came closer. Their fear made sense, but it also placed a strange weight on Martha, making her realize she wasn't like them. She had always felt responsible when others turned away. The wind picked up again, carrying dust across the road. The bobcat shivered violently. Martha bent down, keeping her voice low. "It's okay. I'm going to get help, but you have to stay still." When she rose again to retrieve her phone from the car, the bobcat dragged itself forward, just a few inches, but enough to show that it refused to let her leave its sight. The desperation in its struggle was so raw, so heartbreaking, that Martha had to wipe her eyes before she could see clearly again. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. She searched for the nearest wildlife rescue center, praying someone would answer quickly. As the line rang, she glanced back. The bobcat was no longer moving. It had collapsed on its side, chest heaving, eyes half closed, as though slipping into a place that might not let it return. "Please hold on," Martha whispered. The phone continued to ring. No answer. No one was picking up. A pressure built in her chest, fear mixed with helplessness, the same feeling she'd once had while waiting for a doctor to call her back about medical results years ago. Waiting for someone else to take responsibility had never felt right to her. The bobcat opened its eyes again, faint and glassy, searching for her. It trusted her. For reasons she didn't understand yet, it trusted her. Martha ended the call and whispered, "I hear you. I'm not walking away." She stepped closer again, this time lowering herself all the way to the ground so the small creature could see every movement she made. The bobcat blinked slowly and tried to lift its head, but the effort was too much. It settled instead for breathing in her direction, as though needing her presence to stay anchored. In that moment, the world felt strangely quiet. It was just her, the injured bobcat, and the fading warmth of daylight slipping away over the mountains. Cars passed in the distance, but didn't stop. People glanced, but didn't approach. Everyone else had some place to be, something more important to worry about. But Martha stayed. She reached out her hand, stopping just inches from its trembling body, giving it time to decide. The bobcat leaned ever so slightly toward her fingers, not enough to touch, just enough to show it understood she meant no harm. For the first time since stopping her car, Martha felt a fragile spark of hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold. She didn't know if the animal could survive. But she did know one thing with complete certainty: she would not be the one who walked away. Even as the daylight dimmed along the ridge road, Martha remained kneeling beside the injured bobcat, unsure how long its strength would hold. The cold made its small body shiver uncontrollably, and each trembling breath reminded her that time was not on their side. She glanced again at her phone. Still no call back from the Wildlife Rescue Center. She tried twice more, then a third time, but each attempt led only to another unanswered ring. It made her think of all the calls she had made in her life where she'd been placed on hold: medical offices, Insurance claims, even those long conversations with her mortgage provider during harder years. Waiting for help had never brought comfort. Helping others, however, always had. She looked down at the bobcat. Its ear twitched faintly, as though listening for her voice. Perhaps it sensed the hesitation in her breathing. Perhaps it simply understood that she was its best chance. The poor thing tried to lift itself again, but its hind legs remained limp and twisted at an unnatural angle. It managed only to pull its chest an inch forward before its strength gave out. Martha felt her heart tug painfully. It wasn't just wounded, it was fighting to stay alive in the only way it knew how. A sharp crunch of gravel interrupted the quiet. Martha turned to see a silver SUV slowing near the curve. For a hopeful second, she thought someone had finally decided to stop. Instead, the vehicle rolled past her, the driver staring with wide, uneasy eyes before accelerating again. She heard the engine fade quickly, as though the driver couldn't leave the scene fast enough. Another car followed minutes later, a dark sedan with two young hikers inside. They rolled their window down just far enough to speak. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be near that thing," one of them warned. "Bobcats can be unpredictable." Martha gestured toward the tiny creature trembling at her feet. "It's just a baby, and it's dying." The passenger shook his head. "Wild animals know how to handle themselves. You should just let nature take its course." That sentence struck her harder than she expected. She looked at the bobcat again, its ribs rising and falling in shallow movements. Was this really nature taking its course, or was it the result of someone's careless driving? The thought of leaving it alone felt cruel in a way Martha couldn't accept. She'd seen too many people suffer because no one bothered to stop at the right moment. She refused to be another passerby who looked away. The hikers eventually drove off, leaving behind a hollow feeling. The road returned to its usual quiet, as if the world had shrugged and moved on. Martha wrapped her coat tighter around herself, wishing she had brought something heavier. The temperature was dropping faster than expected, and she could feel the cold spreading through her hands. She looked at the bobcat again. It was still fighting. Small twitches, small breaths, trying to stay conscious as its body weakened. "Stay with me," she murmured, though she wasn't sure the little creature could hear her. Footsteps approached unexpectedly from behind. A man in his late 20s, wearing a navy hoodie and carrying a package under his arm, walked cautiously toward her. His delivery van was parked a few yards back. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked gently. "I saw your car and thought maybe you had a flat." Martha shook her head. "No, it's this little one. It's badly hurt. I can't get anyone to answer at the rescue center." The man crouched down, keeping a respectful distance from the bobcat. His expression shifted from concern to something like quiet sorrow. "Poor thing. Looks like it's been through hell." He set his package aside and inched closer. "I'm Evan, by the way. Evan Brooks." "Martha," she replied, grateful for his presence. "I don't know what to do. Everyone else just drove past." Evan looked at the bobcat thoughtfully. "Most folks get scared around wildlife. Can't blame them." Then he added, "But someone's got to help it. And since we're here, I guess that someone is us." Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Evan removed his hoodie carefully and laid it beside her. "Try using this to keep it warm," he suggested. "Animals lose heat fast when they're hurt." The gesture warmed Martha more than the hoodie ever could. Together, they positioned the soft fabric near the bobcat. Martha hesitated, unsure whether touching it directly would frighten it, but the bobcat surprised them both. Instead of shying away, it extended its front paw weakly, resting it against the edge of the hoodie, as though asking for comfort, as though accepting theirs. "This little guy's got trust," Evan murmured, "more than I expected from a wild cat." Trust. The word made something stir inside Martha. The bobcat had been ignored by cars, dismissed by hikers, abandoned by the world. Yet the moment she stepped away, it had dragged its broken body to follow her. What kind of courage did that take? What kind of hope? A sudden gust of wind made the bobcat flinch. Martha reached forward instinctively, her hand hovering above its head. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice soft and steady. "You stay with us. We're not leaving." The bobcat blinked slowly, exhaustion sinking deeper into its gaze. It nestled its face into the edge of the hoodie, its small whiskers brushing the fabric as though savoring the warmth. Evan watched in quiet amazement. "I've seen strays before," he said softly, "but never one that looked at a person like that. It's like it knows you." Martha didn't know what to say. She didn't understand it either. She only knew that something about this moment felt heavier than simple coincidence. The sky darkened further, pushing them to act. "We need to get it somewhere safe," she said. "It won't survive out here." Evan nodded. "There's an emergency vet clinic about 20 minutes from here. They handle wildlife sometimes. I can help you get it into my van. You'll have more room than your car." Martha hesitated. It might panic. But before she finished speaking, the bobcat attempted something brave. It tried to lift its head toward Martha and Evan, weakly, trembling, but unmistakably reaching for the two people who hadn't walked away. Evan's voice softened. "It wants help, ma'am. Let's not waste what strength it's got left." The final push came when another car appeared in the distance. Its headlights washed briefly over the scene. The car slowed just for a moment before speeding up again, disappearing into the curve ahead. No one shouted out the window. No one asked if they needed help. Martha felt something settle firmly inside her. Everyone else had passed by, but she wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. She looked at Evan. "All right," she said. "Let's get him to the clinic." Together they worked gently, moving slowly so as not to frighten the injured creature. And for reasons neither of them fully understood, the bobcat allowed it. It didn't lash out. It didn't try to bite. It simply watched Martha with tired, trusting eyes, as though believing she could save it. Moments later, they had it wrapped loosely in the hoodie, preparing to lift it into the van. The cold wind blew harder now, tugging at Martha's hair, chilling her fingers. But she barely felt any of it. All she saw was the fragile creature breathing unevenly in front of her, still fighting, still hoping. And for the first time since stopping her car, she felt certain that she and Evan had arrived in this moment for a reason. When they lifted the bobcat gently from the ground, its body sagged into their hands with a weary surrender. But its eyes remained open, fixed on Martha, as if reassuring her, "I'm still here." The night air thickened as Evan and Martha carried the injured bobcat toward his delivery van. The fading light stretched long shadows across the dirt, and the cold settled deeper into the little creature's bones. Its breath came out in short, uneven puffs, each one weaker than the last. Martha felt her heart twist with worry. She wasn't sure how long it could hold on. Evan opened the back doors of the van, clearing space between packages so the animal could lie without being jostled. The young man moved with surprising gentleness for someone who looked so rugged and tired after a full day's work. "Lay him right there," Evan said softly, patting a folded blanket he found in the back. "I keep it for winter deliveries. Figured it might help." Martha nodded gratefully. The bobcat didn't resist as they settled him onto the blanket. It didn't flinch or snarl. It simply exhaled, as though this small moment of warmth was the first kindness it had known all day. Its eyes closed halfway, but not in surrender, more like relief. As Martha stepped back, a faint shake in her hands reminded her how fragile this situation was. She rubbed her palms together, trying to warm her stiff fingers. The cold made everything feel sharper, fear, worry, even hope. Before they could climb into the van, a rustling sound caught their attention. A woman in hiking boots, with a backpack strapped high on her shoulders, appeared at the edge of the road. She had short gray hair and a stern face creased by years under the sun. She stopped abruptly when she saw the bobcat. "What are you doing?" she demanded, startled. "That's a wild animal. You can't put it in a car like that." Evan straightened up, though he kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, it's hurt. Badly. We're taking it to the emergency clinic." The woman shook her head emphatically. "That's dangerous. You don't know what diseases it might carry. And those things can bite without warning. My brother works in healthcare. You don't want to risk infection, especially at your age." Martha had heard warnings like that before, about animals, about strangers, about anything that required a little courage. But she glanced into the van again, seeing the tiny creature trembling inside the blanket. Its ribs showed beneath its thin fur. Its paws were scraped raw from dragging itself across the road. The woman's fear made sense, but fear wasn't going to save that small life. "It's just a baby," Martha replied gently, "and it needs help, not fear." The hiker pressed her lips together, but didn't argue further. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and walked away, leaving behind a chill heavier than the night air. Evan sighed. "People get scared. I guess that's normal." Then he added, "Doesn't make it right, though." Martha nodded, grateful to have someone at her side who understood. She'd spent much of her life helping others. Neighbors in financial trouble, friends overwhelmed with healthcare bills, even strangers who needed advice on insurance paperwork. Helping was simply who she was, and right now the bobcat needed someone like her more than ever. Once they were both inside the van, Evan started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the empty road ahead. The bobcat stirred at the sound, lifting its head weakly before letting it fall back onto the blanket. Martha leaned over the seat to check on it. "You hang on," she whispered. "We're going to get you some help." The van began moving, its tires crunching over gravel as they pulled back onto the narrow mountain road. The ride was steady, careful. Evan drove slowly to avoid jostling the injured animal. Every bump or uneven patch made Martha hold her breath until she saw the bobcat settle again. A few minutes into the drive, Evan spoke softly, trying not to startle the little patient in the back. "You know, most folks wouldn't do what you're doing." Martha shook her head. "It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something I was meant to do." Evan nodded. "I get that." They drove in silence for a bit. The road wound through tall pines, their branches dark and looming. The sky above had deepened to a muted violet, the last light disappearing behind the hills. Every so often, headlights from a passing car would flash across the van's interior, but no one slowed, no one stopped. The world outside kept moving, indifferent. Martha kept her eyes on the small shape in the back. She noticed how the bobcat's breathing remained shallow and uneven. It made her think of her own past, those days when she'd sat beside hospital beds, waiting for news about family, hoping for miracles. Life had taught her that sometimes a moment of compassion mattered more than any well-planned insurance or retirement strategy. "Do you think he'll make it?" Martha asked quietly. Evan hesitated. "I don't know, but he's fighting hard. That's worth something." As they reached a stretch of road with no signal, the van passed another hiker. This one, a young man with headphones in his ears, looked at the scene inside the van with wide, alarmed eyes before hurrying down the path. Martha had to bite back a sigh. She wasn't angry, just saddened that no one else had felt the pull to stop. Her thoughts were interrupted when the bobcat suddenly let out a tiny, choked sound, not a growl, not pain, something like a call. It tried to push itself up again, shifting slightly toward Martha's voice. "He knows you," Evan murmured with quiet amazement. "He really does." Martha reached back instinctively, her fingertips brushing the edge of the blanket without touching the bobcat directly. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're on our way." Evan turned onto the main road leading to the emergency clinic. The van's interior lights glowed gently, casting a warm hue over the small creature curled on the blanket. For a moment, Martha imagined that if the bobcat could speak, it would say something simple, something she had heard many times from those she'd helped over the years. "Thank you for not leaving me." The clinic sign finally appeared ahead, glowing in the dark like a beacon. Relief washed over Martha so strongly that her shoulders sagged. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until now. "We're almost there," Evan said. "Hold on." The bobcat lifted its head one more time, its eyes soft and slightly unfocused, but unmistakably watching her. Martha placed her hand gently on the blanket, close enough to give comfort without adding fear. That look, fragile, trusting, desperate, would stay with her for the rest of her life. The van turned into the clinic parking lot, and the engine came to a stop. They had made it. And for the first time since she found him on the road, Martha felt a flicker of hope strong enough to push away the cold. The emergency clinic sat in a quiet corner of Flagstaff, its parking lot lit by only a few lamps that flickered against the cold. As Evan turned off the engine, Martha hurried out of the van before the headlights had fully dimmed. Her breath clouded in front of her as she rushed to the back doors. The bobcat lay motionless on the blanket, so still that for a terrible second she feared they had arrived too late. But then its chest rose, shallow, trembling, but unmistakably alive. The relief washed through her like a slow, fragile warmth. Inside the clinic, a young receptionist with a ponytail looked up from her desk, startled by the sight of the injured bobcat in Evan's arms. "You brought in a bobcat?" she asked, half whispering, as though the word itself might cause trouble. Evan nodded, carefully adjusting his grip to support the trembling creature. "It's hurt bad," he said quietly. "We found him dragging himself on the mountain road." The receptionist blinked, stunned for a moment, then hurried to the phone. "I'll call Dr. Howard. She handles wildlife cases." A side door swung open, and a woman in her early 50s stepped out. She wore scrubs, her sleeves slightly rolled up, revealing hands that moved with a calm experience only years of practice could give. Her name tag read, Dr. Lacey Howard, a name Martha vaguely recognized from local news stories about wildlife rescue efforts. "What have we got?" Dr. Howard asked, her voice steady. "A young bobcat," Evan said, laying Rusty gently on the exam table. "Hit by a car, I think." Dr. Howard leaned in immediately, her expression shifting from professional composure to genuine concern. She brushed aside the fur near Rusty's spine, then examined the twisted hind legs with careful, firm hands. Rusty let out a weak sound, more air than voice, and Martha instinctively stepped forward. "Is he in a lot of pain?" she asked softly. "A great deal," Dr. Howard replied. "But he's holding on. That already tells me something important." "What does it tell you?" Evan asked. "That he wants to live." The words filled the room with a fragile hope, but only for a moment. Dr. Howard stepped back and motioned toward the X-ray room. "Let's get a clearer picture." The techs moved quickly. Rusty was transferred onto the imaging table, his small body dwarfed by the large equipment. Martha stood behind the protective glass, watching as the machine hummed to life. Each click and vibration echoed through her, tightening something deep in her chest. When the X-rays appeared on the screen, she didn't fully understand what she was seeing, just a tangle of lines and shadows. But Dr. Howard did. Her silence spoke volumes before she said a single word. "Dear God," she murmured. Martha stepped closer. "What's wrong?" Dr. Howard pointed to one of the images. "Here, see this?" She traced the curve of the spine. "It's broken, right through the lumbar region. The vertebrae are misaligned. And here, She tapped another spot. There's internal bleeding, significant bruising, possibly nerve damage. Evan exhaled sharply. Can that be fixed? Dr. Howard didn't answer immediately. She studied the images again, then folded her arms. This is severe trauma, the kind that usually leaves an animal unable to walk. His hind legs may be completely paralyzed. Judging by the way he dragged himself, he's already lost most nerve function. Martha swallowed hard, her voice trembled. But he's alive. That must mean something, doesn't it? It does, Dr. Howard said gently. It means he's fought a long way to get here. But the truth is, she paused as though weighing how much to say at once, his chances aren't good. Silence settled over the room in a heavy, suffocating blanket. Martha felt her knees weaken. She reached for the edge of the counter to steady herself. Rusty, still lying on the imaging table, opened his eyes just then. He looked straight at her, as if sensing the fear rising in the room. His gaze was faint but steady, almost pleading. He followed us, Martha whispered. He dragged himself to me. He's been fighting since the moment we saw him. There has to be something we can do. Dr. Howard sighed quietly. I won't lie to you. Surgery is the only option. Without it, he won't last long. But even with surgery... She hesitated. There's less than a 7% chance he'll regain use of his hind legs. Maybe even less. The number felt like a blow to the chest. 7%, Evan repeated softly. That's almost nothing. But it's something, Martha said quickly, her voice steadier than she felt. It's more than zero. Dr. Howard nodded. It is. But you need to understand, this surgery is intense and expensive. It takes hours. There's risk of complications, infection, respiratory failure. And even after surgery, recovery would be long. Months of care, specialized equipment, physical therapy. Some of those costs aren't covered by standard insurance. Martha barely heard the last part. Her eyes remained on Rusty. He blinked slowly, his breathing shallow but rhythmic. He wasn't giving up, not yet. Please, Martha said softly, do whatever you can. Dr. Howard met her gaze with a softness that carried years of compassion. I'll do my best. But before we proceed, she stepped a little closer. You should know something else. Martha braced herself. If this were anyone else, Dr. Howard said quietly, I would have recommended euthanasia to prevent further suffering. But this little one... She glanced toward Rusty. The way he held on long enough to reach you, the way he fought. I've seen animals in worse shape survive because someone believed they could. A tear slipped down Martha's cheek before she could stop it. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder, not too firm, not too soft. You're not alone in this, he told her. Dr. Howard gave a small nod. I'll prep the OR. If you're sure you want to move forward, I'll operate tonight. Martha inhaled deeply. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her, but the choice felt strangely simple. A little life lay ahead of them, hanging by a thread. A life that had crawled, bleeding, terrified, desperate, to reach her. I'm sure, she said. Save him. Dr. Howard gave a solemn nod. We'll begin immediately. As the team prepared the operating room, Rusty was gently moved to a sterile table. He blinked at Martha, and a soft, fragile sound escaped his throat. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It was trust. The kind of trust that binds lives together in quiet, life-changing ways. Martha leaned close to the glass as they wheeled him into surgery. You hang in there, she whispered. I'm here, I'm staying, and I won't leave you now. Rusty closed his eyes. Evan stood beside her in silence. Outside, the cold wind pressed against the clinic windows. But inside, hope, however small, finally had a place to grow. The hallway outside the operating room felt colder than the night air Martha and Evan had just come from. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a pale glow on the linoleum floor. Nurses hurried back and forth with quiet urgency, their footsteps echoing in a rhythm that reminded Martha how fragile time was when a life hung in the balance. Rusty had already been taken inside. The last glimpse she had of him was his small body lying on a sterile metal table, his eyes closing slowly as anesthesia took hold. It was a sight that pressed against her heart like a weight she couldn't lift. Evan stood beside her, leaning slightly on the wall, hands tucked awkwardly into his pockets. He had canceled the rest of his delivery route without a second thought, telling his supervisor he had an emergency. He wasn't sure if he'd get in trouble for it later. Companies these days were strict about schedules and insurance liability, but he didn't care. Something about the way Martha and that little bobcat looked at each other had made walking away feel wrong. "You holding up all right?" he asked softly. Martha nodded, though her hands were trembling. "I'm trying. I didn't expect it to hit me this hard." Evan gave a small, understanding smile. Anyone with a heart would feel the same. She appreciated the words, but they didn't calm the knot in her chest. She stared through the small square window in the OR door. She couldn't see much, just flashes of motion, silhouettes of staff moving deliberately. Dr. Howard was inside, prepping surgical tools. The familiar smells of antiseptic and metal filled the hall, pulling Martha back to memories she preferred not to revisit. Hospital visits, nights spent in waiting rooms, times when hope felt as fragile as a thread. The minutes ticked by slowly. A nurse approached with 2 cups of warm water. "Thought you might need these while you wait," she said kindly. "It's going to be a long night." "Thank you," Martha said. They sat in the small waiting area across the hall. Evan clasped the warm cup between his palms. Martha held hers without drinking, staring down at the steam swirling up like a faint reminder that warmth still existed somewhere beyond the cold anxiety filling her. "What made you stop?" Evan asked after a moment of quiet. She took a slow breath. "I've seen too many people look away when someone is hurting. Maybe it's human nature. Or maybe we've become too cautious. Or too busy worrying about mortgages, retirement plans, insurance bills." She sighed softly. But compassion shouldn't depend on convenience. If a life needs you, no matter how small, you stop. You help. Evan nodded thoughtfully. "I guess you're right." Another wave of silence washed over them. Martha's gaze flicked back to the OR door. She imagined Rusty's tiny body on that cold metal table, surrounded by tools and machines far too big for him. It felt unfair, how something so young could be forced into such a battle. Through the window she saw a quick movement of hands. One of the nurses raised her voice slightly. She couldn't hear the words, but the urgency in them made Martha stand. "What's happening?" she whispered. Evan stood too, watching as staff hurried around the table. A machine beeped rapidly, then steadied, then beeped again. The uncertainty in those sounds made Martha's breath catch. Inside, Dr. Howard leaned over Rusty with a focused intensity. Though Martha couldn't hear a thing, she could tell something wasn't going as planned. Is he all right?" she managed, though no one outside the OR could possibly know yet. A passing tech paused, glancing toward the door. "It's a delicate surgery," she said gently. "Spinal repairs can be unpredictable, but he's in good hands." Martha sank back into her chair. Her heart felt heavier by the second. "He's just a baby," she whispered. "He shouldn't have to fight like this." Evan sat beside her again. "If he's made it this far, he's tough. Tougher than most." She appreciated the reassurance, but her thoughts were tangled in fear. She couldn't shake the image of the bobcat dragging himself across the road, claws scraping against pavement, refusing to give up even when every breath must have felt like agony. That kind of determination didn't come from instinct alone. It came from something deeper, something she couldn't put into words. After what felt like an hour, Dr. Howard's silhouette moved closer to the window. She spoke to the anesthesiologist, then returned to the operating table. Martha watched anxiously as the doctor adjusted a tool, then paused, her posture suddenly rigid. The monitors inside emitted a pattern of beeps that didn't sound like the steady rhythm from before. "Oh no," Martha breathed. One of the nurses inside moved quickly, handing Dr. Howard a piece of equipment. Another nurse adjusted Rusty's position. The urgency in their movements sent a chill up Martha's spine. "Is he?" Evan started. "I don't know," Martha whispered. They both stepped closer to the window, though they knew they wouldn't be allowed inside. All they could do was watch the frantic silhouettes. Inside the OR, Rusty's tiny chest had stopped moving for a few seconds. His fragile heartbeat had flickered dangerously low. Dr. Howard leaned closer, issuing an instruction neither Martha nor Evan could hear. The anesthesiologist adjusted something on the monitor. Then, after a few tense seconds that felt like a lifetime, the bobcat's chest rose again, slowly at first, then more steadily. Martha pressed a hand to her heart. "Thank God." Evan let out a long breath. "He's still fighting." The energy inside the OR shifted. The frantic movement calmed into deliberate focus again. Dr. Howard resumed the repair of the fractured vertebra, using metal pins to stabilize the spine with precision that came from decades of experience. Time blurred. 10 minutes felt like an hour. An hour felt like 10. The surgery was supposed to take 3 hours at most, but by the time Dr. Howard finally stepped out of the OR, her scrub cap was damp with sweat, and her eyes were filled with a kind of exhausted hope. Martha stood immediately. "Doctor." Dr. Howard removed her mask. "He made it through the surgery." Martha's knees almost gave out. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much." Evan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a shaky laugh of relief. "Tough little guy." But then Dr. Howard's voice softened. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped, considering the severity of the damage. But we need to be honest. His chances of regaining full use of his hind legs are extremely low, maybe 10% at best." Martha breathed in slowly. She had expected this. She had prepared for it, but hearing it out loud still stung. "What about surviving?" she asked. "That depends on infection control, nerve response, and his strength," Dr. Howard replied. "But the fact that he fought through surgery, that's remarkable. He isn't giving up." Martha looked through the window again. Rusty lay wrapped in warmed blankets, his tiny chest rising and falling with effort. His body was still, but not lifeless, not anymore. Dr. Howard continued, "He'll need days of monitoring, maybe weeks, and after that, physical therapy. Special support. It's a long road." Martha nodded slowly. "We'll take it one day at a time." Evan smiled at her. "He's lucky you found him." Martha shook her head gently. "I think I'm the lucky one. Not many lives give you a second chance to do the right thing." She turned her gaze back to Rusty, her heart swelling with a quiet resolve that felt stronger than fear. He had dragged his injured body across a lonely mountain road because he believed someone would stop. And now that someone, she and Evan, were here, and they weren't going anywhere. The recovery ward was dim when Martha and Evan were finally allowed inside. The hall smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm fabric softener from the freshly laundered blankets. The soft beeping of monitors created a slow, steady rhythm, one that felt almost comforting after the chaos of the night. Rusty lay curled on a padded bed inside a small enclosure meant for injured wildlife. Heat lamps glowed above him, giving his thin fur a reddish tint. He didn't move, but his chest rose and fell with gentle, measured breaths. For a long moment Martha simply stood there, her hands clasped tightly together. She had spent years visiting hospitals and clinics for her daughter, for her own medical checkups, even for neighbors who needed support. But this felt different. This tiny life had no one else to wait for him, no family filling the room, no insurance paperwork controlling his fate, no loved ones bringing flowers or whispered prayers, only her. Dr. Howard approached quietly. "He made it through the night," she said in a calm but tired voice, "but he's still in a fragile state. We'll need to monitor his vitals every hour." Evan glanced at the bobcat, noticing the way his small front paws twitched now and then. "Is that normal?" "It could be the anesthesia wearing off," Dr. Howard replied, "or nerves firing on instinct rather than true movement. It's too early to say." Martha leaned closer to the glass of the enclosure. Rusty's face was relaxed, his ears slightly flattened. He looked peaceful, something she hadn't seen since the moment she found him dragging himself across the cold road. A soft ache bloomed in her chest. "He looks so small," she whispered. "He is," Dr. Howard said. "He's young, maybe 4 or 5 months old. In the wild, he'd still be learning how to hunt. But life pushed him into a battle he wasn't ready for." Martha nodded slowly. Life had a way of doing that. She knew it too well. As the morning hours passed, Rusty drifted in and out of light sleep. Each time his breathing hitched or his legs twitched, Martha's heart tightened. She stayed close, seated in a small chair just a few feet away. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting warming pads, recording notes. Every so often, one would pause and offer her a gentle smile. The ward felt like a world of its own, quiet, steady, filled with people doing their best to mend fragile things. Around noon, Dr. Howard returned with a clipboard. "We need to discuss the next steps," she said. Martha straightened. "Anything, just tell me what he needs." "The important thing is preventing infection," the doctor explained. "His wounds are deep, especially near the spine. We're giving him antibiotics and medication to reduce inflammation, but we have to watch for signs of fever or swelling over the next 72 hours. Martha nodded again, absorbing every word. "And then there's mobility," Dr. Howard continued gently. "We won't know how much nerve function he has until he's fully awake and tries to move. But you should prepare yourself. He may never walk normally again." Evan let out a low sigh but didn't speak. Martha swallowed her worry. "If he can't walk, can he still live a good life?" Dr. Howard gave a soft smile. "Yes. With the right care, support, and patience, many animals adapt surprisingly well. There are harnesses, carts, even rehabilitation programs. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Possible was enough. Hours later, Rusty finally stirred in a way that wasn't just reflex. His head lifted, just barely, and his eyes opened to a thin sliver. They blinked slowly, unfocused at first. Then they drifted toward the sound of Martha's voice as she leaned closer. "There you are," she murmured, relief warming her words. "Welcome back, sweetheart." Rusty blinked again, this time with clarity. His tired gaze found her, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. His whiskers trembled, his chest rose in a shaky breath, and then he let out a soft, broken sound. A tiny rumble, barely audible, but unmistakably a call for comfort. Martha's eyes filled instantly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here." Evan stepped closer, watching with quiet amazement. "He remembers you," he said. "After everything, he still knows who stood by him." Rusty attempted to shift his weight, lifting his front paws slightly. But the effort sent a jolt of pain through him, and he collapsed gently back into the blankets. His hind legs didn't move at all. They lay limp behind him, untouched by his attempt to rise. Dr. Howard entered just in time to see the struggle. "Easy," she said softly, stepping over to adjust the bedding. "You're not ready yet, little one. Give your body time." Rusty blinked, exhausted again. Martha felt a deep ache expand in her chest. "Does he know what's happened to him?" "Animals don't understand injury the way we do," Dr. Howard explained. "But he can sense what he can and can't do. And right now, he knows something is wrong. That's why he needs familiar voices, calm energy. It helps him feel safe in a strange place." "I can stay," Martha said immediately. Dr. Howard nodded. "As long as you'd like." Later that afternoon, Evan brought sandwiches and coffee from a nearby shop. They ate quietly in the small waiting area, talking about simple things: weather, their jobs, the rising costs of health care and home insurance, the kind of conversations older adults often shared while waiting on uncertain news. But no matter what they said, their attention tugged back to Rusty's enclosure every few minutes. At one point, a nurse asked if Rusty had a name. Martha hesitated, then looked at Evan, unsure. Evan shrugged. "He looks like a Rusty to me." Martha smiled softly. "Yes, Rusty." The name settled into the room like a warm blanket. When they returned to his enclosure, Rusty had lifted his head again. His ears twitched at the sound of his name, and his gaze softened when it found Martha. "He's responding to you," Evan said quietly. "It's like you're his anchor." "I think he's been alone for a long time," Martha replied. "Maybe too long." As evening crept in, Dr. Howard returned with a new set of instructions. "He's stable for now," she said, "but tomorrow we begin gentle therapy. Just small steps, literally. We'll support his front legs, help him build enough strength to sit up. It won't be easy, but he's stronger than he looks." Martha nodded. "We'll be here." "You're a big part of his progress," Dr. Howard said warmly. "Animals heal not just from medicine, but from kindness." When the lights dimmed for the night, Martha remained by the glass. Rusty, perhaps sensing the end of a long day, shifted slightly toward her. His eyes fluttered, then closed, but his breathing steadied with a quiet peace. Evan approached, his voice gentle. He knows he's not alone anymore. Martha placed her hand against the glass, inches from Rusty's small face. "No," she whispered. "He never will be again." Rusty's whiskers twitched in response, and for the first time since the night began, Martha believed he truly had a chance, not just to live, but to heal. The next weeks passed in a slow rhythm, marked by the soft hum of machines, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, and the gentle encouragements Martha whispered through the glass of Rusty's enclosure. Each day she arrived early in the morning, often before sunrise, carrying a thermos of warm tea and the quiet determination of someone who refused to let hope slip away. Evan visited as often as he could between deliveries, always bringing something useful: fresh towels, new blankets, or even a soft toy shaped like a rabbit, which Rusty surprisingly took comfort in. Under the guidance of Dr. Howard, Rusty began the first steps of rehabilitation. His front legs, though thin, grew stronger as he pushed himself up to sit. It wasn't much at first, a wobble, a tremble, but each movement was a victory. His hind legs, however, remained still, lying behind him like distant memories of what they once had been. The nerve damage was more severe than they'd hoped. Dr. Howard monitored his progress closely, but no amount of coaxing or therapy had stirred those limbs back to life. One morning, while Martha was softly reading aloud from a weathered book she carried in her purse, Dr. Howard approached with a clipboard. Her expression was calm, but Martha felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest even before the doctor spoke. "Can we talk for a moment?" Dr. Howard asked gently. Martha nodded and closed her book, following her to a small office near the end of the hall. Evan, who had arrived just a few minutes earlier with a bag of sandwiches, joined them, sensing the weight of the conversation. Dr. Howard folded her hands on the desk. "Rusty is doing incredibly well in terms of healing," she began. "His incision has closed beautifully, his appetite is returning, and he's gaining strength in his upper body. But, she paused, choosing her next words carefully. "His hind legs show no response, no nerve reaction, no movement. After this much time, we must accept that he's permanently paralyzed." Martha felt the words settle like cold stones in her stomach. She had known this was possible, likely even, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "Does that mean he'll never walk again?" she asked quietly. "He can walk," Dr. Howard said gently, "just not in the way he used to. With a specialized mobility cart, he can move freely, even play. Animals adapt far better than humans expect." She sighed softly. "But he can never return to the wild. He wouldn't survive. He can't run, climb, or defend himself." Martha swallowed, glancing toward the glass that looked into the ward. Rusty was there, his small face resting on his blanket, watching the doorway as though waiting for her return. Where will he go? "There are sanctuaries," Dr. Howard continued. "Good places, caring places. But there's a long waiting list, and not all sanctuaries can take in a bobcat with special medical needs. He'll require daily assistance and ongoing therapy, and the cost is something we have to consider." Evan leaned forward. "What kind of cost?" Dr. Howard explained: medical supplies, special harnesses, follow-up visits, modifications for mobility support. The kind of ongoing care that insurance didn't cover and most wildlife facilities couldn't afford. It was the kind of practical reality people often avoided acknowledging, like the fine print in a mortgage document or the rising premiums in health insurance, silent burdens that could reshape a life overnight. Martha absorbed every word. Her mind drifted to her own bills, the careful budgeting she lived on, the retirement planning she had spent years navigating. Taking on an animal with this level of need would be a significant responsibility, but responsibility had never frightened her. Abandoning someone who trusted her, that was the fear she couldn't bear. "Is there any chance at all that someone might adopt him?" Evan asked. Dr. Howard hesitated. "Bobcats aren't pets. Legally, most people can't adopt one without special permits. And even then, caring for a disabled wild animal is a challenge few are prepared to handle." Martha felt the heavy truth settle across the room, pressing on her chest. Rusty had nowhere to go, no future in the wilderness, no permanent place in the world unless someone made room for him. She stood slowly, walking back toward the ward with Evan following quietly behind. Rusty lifted his head the moment she entered his view. His ears perked and his eyes brightened with recognition. He made a small effort to drag himself closer, using his stronger front legs to inch forward both inside the enclosure. It was clumsy, exhausting, and yet somehow full of heart. "He's trying," Martha whispered. "Even now, he's still trying." Evan put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Because he knows you." For a moment, Martha simply watched Rusty. She saw the way he pushed himself up every time she came near, the way his eyes softened, the way his breathing steadied. He remembered her voice, her presence, her care. In a world where everyone else had passed him by, she had stopped, and it had meant everything. Dr. Howard approached, quietly behind them. "I can arrange a place at a sanctuary," she said softly, "but it might take months. He would stay here until then." Martha didn't respond right away. She was still staring at Rusty, who had managed to pull himself into a sitting position, front legs locked in determination. When their eyes met, something inside her shifted, something warm and steady. She crouched down so her face was level with his. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "you fought harder than any creature I've ever known." Rusty gazed at her, and as she extended her hand toward the glass, he leaned forward until his tiny nose pressed against where her fingers rested. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't curiosity. It was trust, the same trust she saw the night he dragged himself across the cold road begging for help. Martha felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes. She realized then that she didn't just care about Rusty. She felt connected to him in a way she hadn't expected. A bond built not of obligation, but of recognition. They were two souls who understood pain, endurance, and the quiet fear of being left behind. She took a deep breath. "Dr. Howard," she said softly but firmly, "what would it take for me to give him a home?" The doctor blinked, surprised. "You want to take him in yourself?" Martha nodded. "If he can't go back into the wild, then he needs a place he can feel safe, a place where he's cared for. I can make room. I've lived in that home alone for years. It's time it sheltered someone who needs it." Evan smiled slowly, almost proudly. "You really mean it?" "I do." Dr. Howard paused, considering. "It won't be simple. There are permits, inspections, special guidelines for keeping a wild animal. And financially, "I'll manage," Martha said. "I've handled tougher things." Rusty let out a soft sound from the enclosure, almost as if he sensed the shift in tone. His eyes brightened, and he made another small, determined crawl closer. Dr. Howard's expression warmed. "If that's truly what you want, then I'll help you. We'll go through every step together." Martha smiled through her tears. "Thank you." And though Rusty couldn't understand her words, he seemed to understand the feeling behind them. His whiskers twitched faintly, and he lowered his head, finally relaxing after weeks of fear and uncertainty. Evan leaned closer to Martha. "Looks like he's already chosen you." She nodded. "And I choose him too." The decision settled over the room like a soft blanket, wrapping them in a quiet certainty that felt as natural as breathing. Rusty would not return to the wild, but he would return to something far better. He would return to a home, a family, a life that someone had chosen to share with him. Spring arrived quietly in Flagstaff, the kind of spring that slipped in on soft breezes and cool mornings, bringing just enough warmth to remind people that winter didn't last forever. The snow on the rooftops melted into silver ribbons that trickled down gutters, and sunlight found its way through the tall pines outside Martha's home. It had been nearly 6 months since the night Rusty was rushed into surgery. 6 months of careful healing, slow progress, and small miracles that stitched themselves into the fabric of each day. Rusty no longer lived behind glass walls or beneath hospital lamps. His enclosure now sat inside Martha's sunroom, a wide space filled with soft rugs, blankets, potted plants, and the steady comfort of quiet afternoons. His mobility cart, a small, lightweight frame with padded straps for his hindquarters, leaned nearby, ready for when he wanted to explore the room. It took him weeks to adjust to the cart, but once he did, it became a part of him. He moved with surprising speed, almost like he'd reclaimed something he once thought lost. Every morning, Rusty woke before Martha, stretching his front legs with a determined little huff before nudging the edge of the enclosure with his paw. Martha would smile, shuffle into her slippers, and greet him with the same warm words. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for the day?" She had rearranged her home to make room for him. Cleared cluttered corners, added ramps, and installed safety gates just as she once had when her daughter was small. Her budget was tight, especially after paying for home adjustments, vet visits, and ongoing therapy sessions. She found herself reviewing her insurance paperwork late at night and rethinking her retirement plan. But every time she looked at Rusty's bright eyes or felt him nudge her knee with affection, the worry loosened its grip. Some costs weren't burdens. They were gifts that made a life fuller. Rusty had grown since the night she found him. His fur had thickened, his stripes deepened, and his eyes held a confidence that hadn't been there during those frightened early days. He still couldn't move his hind legs, but he no longer seemed to mourn what he'd lost. Animals didn't dwell the way humans did. They lived in the present, finding joy in whatever movement they could manage, whatever warmth surrounded them. And Rusty had plenty of warmth now. Evan visited often, usually after his delivery route ended. Rusty always recognized the sound of Evan's footsteps, lifting himself excitedly on his front legs. When Evan entered the sunroom, Rusty would drag himself forward or roll eagerly in his cart, making soft chirping sounds that were unmistakably happy. It had become a ritual for Evan to bring a treat, a soft toy, a piece of fresh chicken, or even just a few minutes of gentle scratches behind Rusty's ears. "You've spoiled him," Martha teasingly told him once. Evan grinned. "I think he deserves a little spoiling." One mild afternoon, Martha sat at the kitchen table, sorting through paperwork, when she heard the familiar clatter of Rusty's cart rolling across the sunroom floor. She turned to see him pushing his way toward the sliding glass door that looked out onto the yard. His front paws pressed against the glass, his whiskers twitching with curiosity. "You want to go out?" she asked, rising from her chair. Dr. Howard had approved supervised outdoor time weeks ago, but Martha still treated each session with care. She opened the sliding door and lifted Rusty gently, carrying him outside before placing him on a wide, padded mat beneath a maple tree. The air smelled of fresh soil and budding flowers. Birds chattered in the branches overhead. Rusty lifted his head toward the sound, breathing deeply, his ears twitching in every direction. "This is your world, too," Martha whispered, stroking his fur, "even if it looks different than it used to." Rusty lowered himself onto the mat, front legs stretched out comfortably. He blinked up at the sky as though relearning how wide it was. With time, he shifted his weight, trying to lift his chest higher. He couldn't climb trees or leap through tall brush, but he could feel the sun warm his fur. He could watch the wind ripple through leaves. He could listen to the hum of life surrounding him. And sometimes that was enough. After a few minutes, footsteps approached from the side gate. Evan appeared with a small bag slung over his shoulder. Rusty perked up instantly, letting out a soft sound that made Evan smile. "There's my guy," he said warmly. "Out enjoying the day, huh?" He knelt beside Rusty, rubbing the top of his head in that familiar spot that always made the bobcat lean into his hand. Martha watched them with a soft smile. "You two act like old friends." "We are old friends," Evan replied. "We just met later in life." He reached into the bag and pulled out a new harness, specially designed for stability and comfort. Thought this might give him more support, less strain on his chest. Martha accepted it gratefully. "You always think of the things I forget." "That's why there's two of us," Evan said simply. They fitted the new harness on Rusty carefully. He tolerated it well, pushing himself upright in a half-sitting position before using his front legs to scoot forward. Evan steadied the cart behind him. "Look at him go," he whispered proudly. They spent the afternoon in the yard. Rusty moved slowly but deliberately across the padded mat, occasionally stopping to sniff the breeze or watch a squirrel run along the fence. The world was larger than his body allowed him to roam, but he explored every inch he could, savoring the piece of life he had. Later, as the sun lowered and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Martha carried Rusty back inside. She placed him gently on his favorite rug near the sunroom window, where he settled with a contented sigh. Evan lingered by the doorway, watching him. "You know," he said quietly, "he's happier than most animals I've seen at sanctuaries." "I think he knows he's home," Martha replied. Evan nodded. "He chose you, and you chose him. That makes all the difference." As the evening deepened, the house grew quiet. Martha prepared a warm cup of tea, then sat beside Rusty as he rested. She stroked his fur in slow, gentle motions, letting the comfort of the moment settle around her. "You've come so far," she whispered, "from that cold road, dragging yourself toward the only person who stopped, to this warm home where you're loved." Rusty lifted his head slightly, pressing it into her hand. Martha smiled. "You matter, Rusty. You always did." Outside, the last of the daylight faded behind the pines. Life had not returned Rusty to the wild. Instead, it had returned him to something more human, something built from compassion, resilience, and an unwavering belief that every life deserved a chance. Rusty closed his eyes peacefully, surrounded by warmth, safety, and the quiet hum of a home that had become his world. A world where, for the first time, he didn't have to crawl after hope. It had crawled back to him. And all because one stranger finally stopped. If this story touched your heart, please drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with us. And if you'd like to follow more gentle, true-hearted stories like this one, please consider subscribing. Your support helps keep these little miracles alive, and I'd be honored to share the next story with you.